Hello to everybody joining me. I'm Erin, and welcome to the Virtual Education Intervention Podcast. The name should give it away, but I'm here to educate, encourage, and entertain families and teachers who live and work with neurodivergent family members, friends, and students. And yep, you guessed it, my primary location for education is virtual. Sometimes we all just need a little more community, and we benefit from having people in our lives who understand how we live, how we work, and what our minds are consumed with daily. We just need support and encouragement within that space. If you're here, welcome to our community. Thank you for joining me on episode 4 of the Virtual Education Intervention Podcast. I really hope if you're following along that you've enjoyed the previous episodes as much as I've enjoyed putting the information together for you. We look to be a community and a resource for anybody that falls under the umbrella of neurodivergence or those who support our neurodivergent community, parents, educators, and friends. Last week in our episode, we did a deep dive into dyslexia. Dyslexia is a form of neurodivergence, and we learned before that the term neurodivergent is really just a buzzword to talk about the umbrella of people whose brain works differently. Now, with dyslexia, we know that these individuals have challenges with reading. When we do a deeper dive, we can learn about those specific areas of challenge. But last week, we talked a lot about the Orton-Gillingham approach to reading intervention. Now, I said last week that as we dive into this intervention, it's important to remember that our brains use neurons to connect information. Now, I am not a scientist. I will never claim to be one. But it is important that our students, and that we as well, understand the need for consistent repetition and why our brains really need that when something is maybe kind of boring, like repeating letters and sounds. By doing something with repetition, the neurons in our brain connect and strengthen. Like a well-worn path is easier to walk on. The more we repeat information, the stronger the connection in our brain and the faster the information flows. Orton-Gillingham includes a significant level of repetition, but it's necessary to allow the neurons in our brain to better connect, to strengthen, and to, over time, allow that information to flow faster. Students see that relatively quickly within their lessons, as every lesson has an element or a taste of success. We talked about that last episode, and we'll talk about that again today. But before we begin, be sure to follow this podcast on whatever major podcast platform you use, and also like and follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram as Erin Luchterhand Coaching. You can also access a wide variety of information on our website, which is just my name, erinluchterhand.com, or email us at erin@erinluchterhand.com, and I'll make sure to have all of that in the description for the podcast as well. Last week, we did a review of the foundations of Orton-Gillingham, and today we're going to briefly review the history of the program so that you know where the term Orton and Gillingham comes from. What I love about this program is that it's incredibly research-based. In the 1930s, a neuropsychologist and pathologist, Dr. Samuel T. Orton, and an educator, they teamed up together. Psychologist Anna Gillingham developed the Orton-Gillingham approach to reading instruction. They did an incredible amount of research, and they created this approach. Orton-Gillingham falls under the umbrella of what we call structured literacy. Now, structured literacy is just how it sounds. It's a very systematic and structured way to learn how to read. But structured literacy is more than just phonics. It's based on the latest research in the science of reading. If you've spent any time with educators who are passionate about reading, or an educator who has done anything above and beyond the typical classroom education, you're going to find out that they refer to the science of reading. And it's just how we break down words, how we break down and how we build up words again. They're going to refer to things like phonemes, fluency, and other things, maybe prosody, all of these big words to essentially explain how language works. Structured literacy incorporates methodologies and strategies like Orton-Gillingham. What you're going to find today, I talk a lot about Orton-Gillingham, and the curriculum that I use is Orton-Gillingham based. But Orton-Gillingham is an overall strategy and methodology that's used in various programs. According to readingrocket.org, Orton-Gillingham was the first teaching approach specifically designed to help struggling readers by explicitly teaching the connections between letters and sounds. Today, decades later, many reading programs use Orton-Gillingham ideas. Now, this is above and beyond your typical phonics-based reading program. Those reading programs are fantastic for the majority of students learning to read. What we're focused on are the students that struggle with learning how to read using those programs or using only those programs. Perhaps this student has dyslexia, or perhaps they have another form of neurodivergence like ADHD, or they're slow processing. Perhaps reading just isn't as natural to them and they need a little extra, but they're not dyslexic. A highly structured approach includes the idea of breaking down reading and spelling into smaller skills involving letters and sounds, and then building on these skills over time. It includes a multisensory approach, so you're using your visual cues, your kinesthetic cues, your auditory cues, and all of those together work really well to match the reading and the spelling skills. I will often tell families when they're concerned about spelling and reading is that we think of spelling and reading together because, of course, they match. You read something, you write something, both skills are equally important, and they tie together to language. However, you have to kind of do the opposite to do each skills. They're opposite of each other. When you're reading, your eyes have that visual clue of what letter to read. They know that the letter matches with the sound, and so they're able to put that sound together. So the benefit of reading is your eyes have that clue, right? It's telling you what to read. It's telling your brain what to read and what sounds to make. When you're spelling, your eyes don't have a clue. Your ears get the clue. And so the sound goes in your ears and your brain has to kind of reverse engineer that to think, okay, I know that sound. Now what visual letter do I assign it? And so when you break down those skills, they're pretty much opposite. And we have to work both of them at the same time if you want them to match. So if you have a student that might be a little better at reading than they are at spelling, you're going to want to start at the lowest common denominator, so to speak. Because you want to bring that spelling up to the reading, you're going to start at whatever Orton-Gillingham lesson you need to bring that spelling up. Great that your student already knows the sounds involved for the reading component, but we need to attach that spelling component as well. It's going to ground them a little bit more and strengthen their literacy when they can spell and read the same skills at the same level. Now, I mentioned breaking down sounds into smaller skills with letters and sounds. This is what I was referring to before about the science of reading, right? You're going to learn how to break these sounds down. There's a host of things we include with Orton-Gillingham. You might be looking at what pattern this letter combination falls under. Is it a vowel team? Well, what's a vowel team? A vowel team is anytime you have two letters working together, at least one of them is a vowel, and they have to make one vowel sound, right? Two letters working together, perhaps it's both vowels, perhaps one's a vowel and one's a consonant, but the bottom line is that they work together to make one vowel sound. So usually when I'm working with students at this point, I point out the fact that their eyes are going to see two letters, but their ears are only going to hear one sound. So it's moments like that that allow us the opportunity to really ingrain in our students these differences, right? Okay, I have to now deeply recognize that what I see and what I hear and what I'm going to say may not completely match my initial thought on it. And that's okay, right? So each student is learning what I call a tedious process, but an important process for them to really have a deep understanding of language. The multisensory approach, like I said before, we're using our hands, we're kinesthetic, we're visual, we're auditory, and all of that helps with both the reading and the spelling component. But we know overall as educators that using these different types of learning can really help build a well-rounded approach to learning. Students are using sight, hearing, touch, movement, and it's connecting the language together for them in a way that basic reading curriculums don't always do. Essentially, the expectation in Orton-Gillingham is that students are going to learn every sound and letter combination out there. They make a connection between the way that letters look and the sounds that they make, where it's found in a word, and some other details. I will always say it's a harder way to learn, but our dyslexic students and our struggling readers, they need this repetition and they need this level of detail to really be successful readers. And guess what? I have seen time and time again that they become successful readers. Reading is a skill, and skills can be learned. Now, it might not be a natural skill for me, much like I will never be a natural athlete. But can I go play the game? Sure. Can I even win sometimes? Sure. Can I get better if I practice? Yeah. If I'm in my driveway shooting hoops and I get a little coaching and I practice, I'm going to start making baskets more and more frequently. You can probably tell I'm not an athlete, but I'm going to improve. Now, I'm never going to be the NBA All-Star, and that's okay, but I'm going to learn and I'm going to grow because it's a skill. And the same can be applied for reading intervention. Now, Orton-Gillingham is a methodology. It incorporates all of that kinesthetic learning, that repetition, the science of reading. It also includes the visual, the kinesthetic. You're having a very structured approach. But there is an element of flexibility there because you can tailor the timeline, you can tailor the length of the program based on your students' needs, and you have some flexibility to make some adjustments. Now, there are also other programs, and we mentioned a few last week, that use Orton-Gillingham, an Orton-Gillingham approach. They use aspects of Orton-Gillingham within their curriculum. Now, we mentioned Wilson, Barton, Lexia, Logic of English, Reading Horizons, and a phonics-based program that has elements I've noticed with All About Reading. I am not here to promote one program or another. I'm not sponsored by anybody. I have experience with some of these programs. I've heard really great things about some of these programs and really not as great things about some of the others. But ultimately, if you're a parent looking for a program for their child or a tutor that is trained in any of these areas, I want you to be educated about what's best for your child. The programs that I use, how they compare to these program options out there. One of these might be a wonderful program for your child or your student. But we're going to dive into two of them today to give you a little bit more of a broad, big picture understanding of the purpose behind each of these programs so that if you're interested in learning more, you can choose one of these programs and do a deeper dive on there. These programs include the aspects of Orton-Gillingham, but they also vary in terms of the intended audience, the scope and sequence, and the speed and structure. So we're going to first compare Wilson, and in a little bit, we're going to compare Barton. So today, we're going to focus on Wilson and Barton and how they compare to Orton-Gillingham as a methodology. OG, Orton-Gillingham, is a set of instructional principles. Okay, now if you compare that to Wilson, Wilson is a structured reading program based on those Orton-Gillingham principles, offering a more defined curriculum and materials for teachers to use. So it uses a specific scope and sequence, and while it uses Orton-Gillingham practices, it is more rigid and structured in its scope and sequence. Wilson has developed 3 levels of programming, or as they call them, tiers. They have what's called Foundations, K through 3, Just Words, 4 through 12, and Wilson Reading Program for grades 2 through 12. The lessons are done in 3 blocks, roughly 20 to 30 minutes, with a minimum of 2 lessons per week. It can be done in groups of between 1 and 4 students. So the lesson contains 5 main parts, including phonemic awareness, the instruction of work analysis, reading and spelling, cumulative instruction, and teaching of mastery. Those are some big words. And if you're a parent, you might be like, what in the world does that even mean? That sounds fancy and educational and important. And they are important. This is where we get to the science of reading components. Phonemic awareness just means that the student is aware of the phonemes and the sounds that the phonemes make. A phoneme is just the sound you hear when you see the letters on the page, or the sound you make when you see the letters on the page. So when I'm teaching my students a new phoneme, maybe they're learning that OY says oi, or EA says E. That's just kind of the awareness that students have of those phonemes, and that individual words might have multiple phonemes in them. And that's kind of now then leading into syllables and things like that. You've got other areas here, and each lesson consists of 5 main parts. So this is a much more structured approach compared to Orton-Gillingham. Orton-Gillingham has more flexibility, and while it really values consistency, you have to have that when you're doing intervention, the student can go at their pace, worry less about the specific timeline and the completion that Wilson suggests. So Wilson's going to have your student with at least twice a week, minimum 20 to 30 minute lessons, and it's very rigid that way. Orton-Gillingham, often when I do this, I'm talking to the parents, I'm doing a baseline assessment, I'm seeing the needs of the student, and we're really kind of targeting, well, what's our end goal, right? Do we hope to be through the program in a year? Do we hope to be through the program in 2 years? Do you want to go at the pace that your child can absorb the information, which is best practice? We're also looking at how frequently can we meet? What does our schedule allow? Right? Ideally, I'm probably recommending 2 to 3 times a week for our really, really dyslexic and struggling readers. But we also have to kind of work with reality. And so we're just going to adjust what we need to adjust to meet the needs of the child where they're at with what they have available. Now we're going to take a look at Barton and compare Barton to Orton-Gillingham. Barton is considered a more structured, user-friendly program with pre-packaged lessons designed for a wider range of tutors or families, while using Orton-Gillingham demands extensive training for tutors to create individual lesson plans based on the core principles of the method. And so essentially with Orton-Gillingham, I'm pulling the material needed for your student within that lesson. I currently use a virtual program. I'm developing my own program as well that'll be available this summer. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the podcast later. But Barton is a pre-packaged curriculum. So if you are a parent, maybe you're homeschooling or you're a tutor or an educator, and you're just looking for more of a specific curriculum that uses the Orton-Gillingham methodology, Barton may be a great option for you. It's providing you pre-packaged lessons, which is awesome for families, for homeschool families, for tutors. It provides highly scripted lessons with detailed material. So you're getting all of that material and all of that information. It's very scripted. So this can make it easier for tutors or parents with less training to implement the same lesson. An Orton-Gillingham approach is going to allow for more customization. So because you're getting a pre-packaged curriculum in Barton, you're going to get what you're going to get. An Orton-Gillingham trained specialist or interventionist, that allows for more customization of the curriculum and of the programming based on the individual student's needs. It does require that deeper understanding of the science of reading, phonemic awareness, and things like that in order to design the lessons and make sure that they get a really good baseline of where your student is at. So again, this just depends on the intended audience. Who is using this curriculum? I've been through the Orton-Gillingham training, therefore, that's what I use because I do have that deeper understanding of the science of reading. A homeschool mom may not have that. Maybe they do. Or a tutor may need something that's a little more grab and go to work with their struggling reader. Barton might be a great fit for that. Ultimately, the primary distinction here between Barton and Orton-Gillingham lies in the implementation and the training requirements. To become a trained Orton-Gillingham teacher demands a training program, preparation, delivery, oftentimes hours and hours and hours of supervised teaching practice. And you have to have that additional training deeply. And there are levels of Orton-Gillingham training. You might have your beginner level, your intermediate level, and it's just compiled on the depth of knowledge included. Orton-Gillingham is probably really best practice if your student has dyslexia. I've heard of twice dyslexia or twice dyslexic students. And so a really tailored approach to that intervention through Orton-Gillingham might be the better option for those students. But like I said before, it really depends on who is completing the intervention for the students, what the ultimate target audience is, who the target audience is, and who's providing it. So are Wilson or Barton good options for you? They absolutely might be. And I would recommend doing a little of your own research into how these curriculums and how these programs are implemented. If you're a parent with a struggling reader, whether you homeschool or they go to public or private school, and you're trying to provide them an additional layer of support at home, perhaps one of these programs would be a good fit for you, but you want to know what's required of me. As the intervention provider, what does this lesson look like? Those are the types of questions you would want to ask. Logistically, how do I structure this lesson? What does Wilson give me in order to structure this lesson? What does Barton give me in order to structure this lesson? Now, I am obviously a big fan of Orton-Gillingham based programs, and both of these programs include those elements. So keep that in mind. I use a very structured literacy program that is Orton-Gillingham based. It uses the elements of Orton-Gillingham. If I had to kind of explain it, it's pretty purely Orton-Gillingham. Now, I often hear people will ask me, well, but how does that work online? You've talked about everything being multisensory. How are students moving their bodies, and how are students doing the visual and the auditory and doing all of these elements, but they're doing it online? How does that work? And is it even effective? Well, we have learned in the last few years that virtual education can be highly effective. Now, I was teaching online before teaching online was a thing during COVID. And over my almost decade of online teaching experience, I've learned a significant amount of strategies for virtual education and how to make it successful. Now, I'm not suggesting by any means that virtual education is the best for every kid or every individual, but it can be a really great option for many, many students. Now, think of it this way. It's one of my favorite things about virtual intervention. You are no longer limited by what is in your local region for support. The virtual allows us to work with students anywhere. Personally, I live in the state of Wisconsin, and only 2 of my clients live in the state of Wisconsin. I work with students in Kentucky. I work with students in California. I work with a student that is traveling the world, and this year alone has been to Bali, Bolivia, Spain, Costa Rica. And so virtual programming allows us to bring our intervention essentially anywhere where there's a need. And on the flip side of that, if you're a parent or an educator and you're looking to provide supports, more specifically probably for parents, if you're looking for support for your child, you're no longer limited to what your town or city or school is going to offer you. You now can expand your search nationwide, internationally. We can be anywhere and provide that level of support, which I think is beautiful. It really removes that barrier. So I'm going to do a brief deep dive into why the Orton-Gillingham program that I use works so well online and in person. It was designed by an Orton-Gillingham trained specialist. who has achieved mastery in this programming. It is used by an Orton-Gillingham trained specialist. Everything is contained in one place. So these other curriculums, they might be really great if you have a kid who needs to feel, touch, maybe they have some stimming, and they need to feel things, and they need to move things, and they need to manipulate things. My experience, some of these curriculums have a lot of what I call visual clutter or visual stimulation, overstimulation, because they've got worksheets and worksheets and worksheets that your child has to read to practice. They have flashcards for sight words. They have flashcards for phonemes. They have other practice tools, right? There's just a lot going on. And for my daughter, that was overwhelming. The amount of time she was able to focus on some of this, because this skill was lacking, was very short, and there was a lot of frustration. She would be overwhelmed by the worksheets piled up in front of her. And it was just too much for her. Now, these are great multisensory tools. I have nothing against them. I think flashcards are fantastic. But for my daughter, it was too much visual overwhelm. Maybe your kid is the same way. If you've tried some of these curriculums, or all about reading is just not working because it's too much all at once, maybe trying something like our Orton-Gillingham based virtual intervention would be a good fit for your child. It reduces the virtual clutter because everything is in one place. Everything is based on a slide deck that basically outlines and sequences consistently, lesson to lesson, the whole thing right there in front of the kid. All I have to do is go to the next slide, and the next picture or the next word or the next sound or the next drill pops up. Now, we've talked about consistency and repetition, and it's important to note that an Orton-Gillingham based lesson is going to have the same structure every lesson. You don't have to get creative and come up with a new order of operations every single time you meet with your student. It should be the exact same, and the only differences should be the sounds that you're practicing and the words that you're reading and spelling. So when I work with my students, they know, and I introduce them to this right away in our first lesson, but they know that they're going to start with what we call the old review. And the old review is a review of 2 lessons prior. And then they're going to move on to the new review, which is the review of the lesson from last time. They'll go to the visual drill, then they'll go to the auditory drill, then the blending drill. And only after all of those reviews and drills, that's when they get to the new part, the new phoneme. And within the new phoneme, they're reading words, they're spelling words. They're reading a passage, they're spelling sentences. So you're starting small and you're expanding, but that's the order of operations of every lesson. And in the virtual lesson, everything is on one slide deck. Now, here's why it works for in-person as well. Maybe you have a child that this sounds really great, but man, they're wiggly and their attention's not going to hold to a computer for an hour. You can use the same curriculum with an in-person student, but still use your computer to produce the information and to provide the lesson. I've done that. I see a student in person, and we still use my computer because the lesson is right there all in one place. There's less visual overwhelm. Now, I do still have them write. Maybe they have a whiteboard or they have a notebook. I still have them write, and they spell by writing it out. It's multisensory. Sometimes I use finger tapping. So if I am introducing a new sound, for example, today I introduced E-I-G-H. It says A, as in 8, nay, neighbor. And I had the student tap their finger. So you take your thumb and then you tap it to your forefinger and then your middle finger and you go down the line. E-I-G-H says A, and you kind of flash your hands. So these are some of those multisensory aspects that we're bringing into the lessons. Now, We all know some kids are wiggly. I'm all about moving their body during the lesson. If they need to get up, if they need to stretch, if they need to wiggle, if they need to bounce on a ball, whatever they need to do to keep their body engaged, I'm all about. One of my favorite things about Orton-Gillingham and the virtual lessons we have is that there is a taste of success in every single lesson. We use what we call fair reading and spelling, meaning I will never ask my student to read something or spell something using a phoneme that they have not yet been taught. Perhaps I know that they're in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and they've probably seen EA says E or somewhere. But if they're on lesson 20 and that's the sound I teach on lesson 35, then I am only using sounds that they have learned up through lesson 20 with me. Every lesson, they're only reading words and reading sentences and reading a paragraph with words that they have learned or sounds and words that they have learned so far. They are only ever asked to spell a word or a sentence using sounds that they have learned so far. Now that makes for some pretty funny passages and sentences to spell early on, but it's highly effective because I know that student has had that education in that topic. I know they can do it, and I can encourage and prompt and support along the way, but they taste that element of success. At this point, you're only competing with yourself. Your student is only competing with themselves. And when you follow the scope and sequence, there is that incredible amount of review. Like I said, every lesson includes a review and those drills. And so students get that consistent repetition. Their neurons connect. And they become really confident over time with the fair reading and spelling pieces. They feel confident. I have had students, and what I love to do with the passage, I've had students compete against themselves. So by the time you get to the new part of the lesson, you're learning the new phoneme, I like to end it with the reading passage. And it might be anywhere from 65 to 100 words in the first third of the program. And I'd like to tell my students, I'm going to time you, and we're going to read this several times, and I want you to have a little competition with yourself. So let's read it the first time. And this first time, you're just figuring out many of these words. And it's okay to take your time. I want you to stop at words you don't know. And I want you to struggle. And I want you to have that, what we call productive struggle. And I want you to figure it out. So take your time, but I'm going to time you. And when they finish that, we celebrate. Even if they got words incorrect, I tell them you had 64 out of 67 words correct. And these were the 3 that we need to correct. So I'm very specific with the instruction in this reading piece. Let's take a look at this word that you got wrong. Let's reread it together. And I walk through the students with that passage. I don't just let them read it again and again and make the same mistakes. We go through those details every time. And every time I say, well, here's how long it took you. Now let's try it again. You've already figured out these words. This second time, you might have to remind yourself of what these words say. And that's okay. But I bet you can do it a little bit faster. Now, you don't want your students reading so fast that they're making mistakes or skipping over words and not trying to sound them out. But the goal is to allow your students to see that they can increase their speed. They can increase their fluency. They have the capability of doing it, and they're proving it to themselves. And once students have that taste of success in reading, when reading has been a challenge, they're hooked and they want to keep going. They want to continue to show the success. They want to feel that again. And so they work for you, which is awesome. They work for themselves to continue to learn and grow. I've had students try to read the same passage 3, 4, 5 times because they're competitive with themselves and they want to prove that they can just kind of one-up themselves and one-up their brain, which is, I think, kind of cool. Using our Orton-Gillingham based virtual programs, I've seen dyslexic brothers go from being grade levels behind to catching up. Now, it's not immediate. Sometimes it even takes years. But they're going from multiple grade levels behind now to being on par with their classmates. I've seen a homeschool dyslexic student decrease his grade level deficit and increase his confidence. So where he was once multiple grade levels behind, he's almost caught up. That deficit between his grade and his grade level reading has shrunken quite a bit. His confidence has increased. And if you'll ask him now, he's going to tell you that reading is his favorite. I've taken my own struggling reader with speech apraxia through this virtual reading program. We're about a third of the way through, and I have seen her take off with her reading. When in December of 2024, she was reading 8 words per minute. Now she's probably reading 65 words per minute. Her fluency has increased. Her confidence has taken off. She's reading anywhere we go because she can. She's wanting to read the other books that are in her curriculum for history and for science. She says, Mom, I want to read that. Let's take turns reading. And that's so beautiful to me because as a parent, we carry the weight of that, especially as homeschool parents, we carry the weight of our children's education. Really, whether you homeschool or not, you carry the weight of your child's education and the responsibility for their education. And to see something be successful for your child and to see that growth is huge, and it can really kind of be a weight off your shoulders. Now, our team of Orton-Gillingham trained specialists at Erin Luchterhand Coaching, we have availability for virtual sessions right now. If you're interested in supporting your student with a live one-on-one virtual intervention, please reach out to us. I will leave our contact information in the description of this podcast, but you can email us at Erin, E-R-I-N, at erinluchterhand.com, or visit our website. We're also on Facebook and Instagram as Erin Luchterhand Coaching. There's a host of information on our website, erinluchterhand.com, about our services. We also offer executive function coaching or support with elementary math and writing. We have a host of skilled educators and interventionists on our team, but Orton-Gillingham Reading Intervention is a huge part of what we do. Our team is working diligently to produce and prepare our own Orton-Gillingham membership-based program. So if you're not sure, maybe you're not convinced that the direct instruction model will be best for you, or maybe you prefer to teach your own child, I homeschool, I get it, then maybe our Orton-Gillingham membership might be right for you. We're planning to launch this membership program in the summer of 2025, at the very least with the first 1/3 of our programming. So to explain that a little bit more, we're working on slide decks for every phoneme. We're including the most valuable and important aspects of the Orton-Gillingham methodology. We're also recording training for parents and educators on how to really effectively use these slide decks to teach your struggling reader how to read and how to gain that confidence that comes with feeling good about reading and improving their reading. It can also come along with consultation, monthly check-ins. These are some details we're hashing out, so if you have something you think would be really cool, let me know. But each lesson will have a recording with it. So it'll have me walking through the new phoneme, the sounds, what it makes, where you find it in a word, all of those really important elements of the lesson. But it's going to allow you, the parent, the tutor, the educator, to control what you need to control and have that element of flexibility. So we know that structured literacy is so important for our struggling readers. We want to combine a more structured scope and sequence with the flexibility of the Orton-Gillingham model to really tailor it to your own students' needs. So if you're interested in that membership program that's going to be coming the summer of 2025, you can get on our wait list by emailing me, Erin at erinluchterhand.com. Now, as we wrap up, it's important to remember that our dyslexic and struggling readers really desire to do well. They seek to understand and work hard, and sometimes it feels as though there's an information black hole in their brains. This is why it's so important to use the very best strategies to support their learning and their self-confidence. Once a student sees even the smallest amount of success, their confidence is going to soar. They're hooked on feeling good about reading. Erin Luchterhand Coaching, the sponsor of the Virtual Education Intervention podcast, is a mission and vision-driven small business designed to support you. As a team, we provide virtual intervention and education to break down the barriers, like location, and create access to research-based tools that empower neurodivergent individuals. By addressing challenges specific to neurodiversity, our sessions foster growth, resilience, and self-confidence, equipping our students and adults with the skills they need to thrive. We envision a world where neurodivergent individuals are empowered to embrace their unique strengths, knowing that they are created on and for a purpose. Through innovative virtual interventions like we talked about today, we strive to build a future where every learner feels valued, capable, and confident, while also fostering a shared joy in the journey of growth, discovery, and success.
Music licensing reimagined. Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined. Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined.